Good evening, everyone. This is Luke Stearns, and this is my final terrorism project for the class Terrorism and Homeland Security. I'm running this presentation through Screencast-O-Matic, and I hope everyone can hear me okay. So for this project, I chose to focus on the terrorist organization that we know as Al-Qaeda. And starting from the very basic Part 1 identification. There's a few reasons why I chose to focus on Al-Qaeda. Sure, there are many terrorist organizations around the world, but I chose Al-Qaeda for a couple of specific reasons. Reason number one is that the focus of this project, or at the very least the focus that I went with, was on not only a terrorist organization, but one that has had a significant impact on the United States. So you could use an organization such as the Khmer Rouge, or the various organizations that are around the world, but from my research, and arguably, there have been few organizations that have had a greater impact on the United States than Al-Qaeda. Reason number two, Al-Qaeda is it's not an obscure terrorist organization. It's not one that you learn about overnight and go, oh wow, I didn't realize that organization exists. It's a very well-known organization, and I think a large portion of that could be because of the impact that it has had on the United States, and therefore I felt that there would be plenty of information available to compile into a detailed project. And I also found it interesting to use Al-Qaeda because it's not only a political organization, but it's also an extremist religious organization. And I enjoy the opportunity to look at things when I'm doing research and presenting, to look at things from different angles. And because Al-Qaeda is both a political terrorist organization and an extremist religious organization, I felt that this would allow for the opportunity to look at the group and analyze the group from more than just one angle. Again, with the goal of making a rich, detailed project. So going into it, let's talk first about the leadership. In terms of Al-Qaeda, as the majority of us well know, without a doubt, the true leader of the organization was Osama bin Laden. Now, I feel that it's important to learn and present a little bit about bin Laden, not only as bin Laden, the terrorist, the leader of Al-Qaeda, but look from him from where he came from to where he was at the time that we around the world became aware of him. Osama bin Laden was the son of an exceptionally wealthy family from Saudi Arabia. He was known for being both well-spoken and was well-educated. And it's interesting enough that as the head of Al-Qaeda, that his preferred focus of study while he was in school was in religion. Now, transitioning there, bin Laden was well known for being an extremist Sunni Muslim. Just for verification and reference, there are two known, for lack of a better term, classifications or sects of Muslim, one being the Sunni, the other being the Shiite. And being an extremist Sunni Muslim, he supported a very rather extreme and violent brand of Islam. And he brought that not only to a religious aspect, but as well as in politics. In the United States, we're very well known for the separation of church and state, and that mentality did not apply for bin Laden. Bin Laden preached that his level of Islamic jihad extended to the justified killing of non-believers, and that included not just men, or as some terrorist organizations like to use the term, enemy combatants, but women and children were absolutely included. And bin Laden, as an extremist Muslim, followed a strict form of Sharia law, which he interpreted as the following, and I quote, "Muslims, and especially the learned among them, should spread Sharia law to the world, that and nothing else, not laws under the umbrella of justice, morality, and rights as understood by the masses. No. The Sharia law of Islam is the foundation. They say that our Sharia does not impose our particular beliefs upon others. This is a false assertion, for it is, in fact, part of our religion to impose our particular beliefs upon others. Thus, whoever refuses the principle of terror or terrorism against the enemy also refuses the commandment of Allah the Exalted, the Most High, and in His Sharia. Now here we definitely see the extremism of his particular Islam and the religious beliefs of the Al-Qaeda being put into place. It's well known in monotheistic religions, especially just for example Christianity, that part of the religion is to proselytize, is to preach, for a matter of speaking, preach the good word. Now, in this extremist sense, because it is the case of Islam as well, to, just the same as the Christians, preach the good word, but in this case of extremist Islam, that preaching is, of course, because this brand of Islam is extreme, the preaching is extreme as well. And obviously, in bin Laden's opinion, it is not only recommended, but rather necessary to take it to violent extremes. Extremes towards non-believers, be they man, woman, or child. So here we see the basis of the leadership and how that applies to the terrorist organization itself. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Al-Qaeda's history. Now, Al-Qaeda, the terrorist organization, was born following the exit of Soviet forces from Afghanistan. And as such, the basis of Al-Qaeda started in Afghanistan, which is in the Middle East. Now, the United Nations declared Al-Qaeda officially as a terrorist organization in 1999 under Resolution 1267. And this was followed in the wake of several acts of terrorism that occurred even prior to the 9/11 attacks, which, of course, Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden claimed responsibility for. The resolution contained provisions, once it had been applied by the United Nations, contained provisions to, and I quote, freeze Al-Qaeda's assets and those of its leaders, to restrict shipments of the organization's resources, and to limit the travel of its members. Of course, in this case, the need to freeze the assets and those of the leaders, and of course restrict shipments of the resources, was an attempt to stifle the organization. Of course, terrorist organizations are illegal organizations, so as such they use illegal means to finance themselves and gather the resources. So the resolution was an attempt to stifle Al-Qaeda, and if you can stifle them and cut off the resources of a terrorist organization, you cut down on their, for lack of a better term, their little own economy. And it's a way to sort of debunk a terrorist organization without quite resorting to bombs. Now, obviously, that's not always the case. That's not always what has to be done. But that was the attempt from the United Nations. After the attacks on 9/11, multiple nations around the world recognized Al-Qaeda as a terrorist organization, and they themselves passed similar provisions against them, similar to what the UN passed. Since then, multiple operations and airstrikes have been put against the group, and wound up at that point sort of removing the central organization, in which the majority of the leadership retreated into the Middle Eastern wilderness. Now, as I stated before, bin Laden has a religious extremism about him that does not separate from politics. So as such, Al-Qaeda's means are both religious and political. Bin Laden was a Sunni Muslim extremist, and so was Al-Qaeda. And as such, they declare multiple groups to be enemies. One such group is Israel, which is a well-known Jewish nation, and they consider Israel to be the creator of Zionists, Their enemies are as well the United Nations, who they see as a collaborator with the United States. And just as we got, again, talking about extremist religion, they consider the Shiite Muslims to be enemies as well, as they view them as religious heretics. The ultimate goal of Al Qaeda was and is to create an extremist Sunni Muslim caliphate in the Middle East of immense political power. Again, we talk about how we value separation of church and state. That's not the case with Al Qaeda. So now let's talk about the impact on the United States. The attacks on 9/11, for which Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda claimed full responsibility, had drastic effects on the U.S., both in the reaction of the U.S. government and the American people. On a total level, not a lot of people saw this level of destruction and malice coming. It shocked not only the United States, but it shocked the entire world. It was one of the biggest times in which everyone in the United States, man, women, and child, stood together in solidarity. It became the modern day Pearl Harbor, if you will. It was also a time when new laws were being passed in an attempt to increase the security of our country. One of the most commonly known is the Patriot Act. The USA Patriot Act, is actually an acronym describing the uniting and strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct justice. And essentially what this did is this act further utilized and gave further clearance the methods that are used by law enforcement to track down and identify potential terrorists. And, it's become kind of a controversial act by the government. A lot of people tend to view it as unconstitutional. Some view it as necessary. Nevertheless, it was one of the steps taken after 9/11 in an attempt for the United States to bulk up its security and to track down and identify potential terrorists within the country. Now, on May 2nd, 2011, Osama bin Laden was killed in Pakistan by United States Navy SEAL Team 6. Now, though he was killed, I think it's important to take a moment to take into consideration what would have awaited him had he been captured, as a means of looking into what do we do with terrorists. Now, prior to bin Laden's death, there was a worldwide discussion on how to handle his processing. There were some who argued that it would be too big of a case to hold in a criminal court, but there was a very compelling argument that the due process of having him sit before a court would have been favorable, that it would have been a way to showcase American principles and to demonstrate that our justice system can function under a wide array of circumstances, even the most adverse. It would have sort of been a way to cut bin Laden down to size, so to speak, and show him that we're not a country of maliciousness and greed. We are actually a country of principles. Now, because of the severity of his actions and the fact that it happened to the entire country, and yes, it happened in a state, but it affected the entire country, he would have likely been charged on a federal level. And again, that depends on the severity of the crimes and whether they were federal or state, as well as the location. But again, it affected the entire country, not just the states that the attacks came in. Now, since the 9/11 hijackings involved victims of at least 80 countries, there was also discussion on whether it wouldn't be a trial under U.S. control, but rather would be an international tribunal. Now, the significance of this lies in what the sentencing would be. While the United States holds capital punishment legal in a large majority of its states, the majority of U.S.'s allies have outlawed capital punishment. As such, if it was an international tribunal, he would have more than likely had a life sentence. If it was on U.S. soil, it would have more than likely ended with a death penalty. Now, since the crime did occur on U.S. soil, and the majority of the victims were American, the trial would have likely belonged to the U.S. So, that is the total of my project on Al Qaeda. I hope it was interesting and informative, and enjoy your evening. Thank you very much.